Good day, everyone. We have 8 a.m. by my clock, uh, and we will hold just a minute or two to see if any additional participants join us. We are looking at the last of the content workshops. And it's amazing the 6 weeks have gone by rather quickly. And we'll be picking up the last bit of details. I think I will go ahead and begin the process here. Again, we have 5 workshops behind us, and we're picking up the last of the content areas today. Just reminding you again of the overview of the innovation project creation process. We started to pull together a project concept in the first 2 workshops where we could articulate the problem or opportunity that the project was going to address, what the innovation idea was, and then with that in hand, we've gone on to a series of 4 sessions that are about proving the potential. The third workshop said or talked about how do we show that all 3 Ps are part of the value proposition. In workshop 4, we went much more into detail about multi-stakeholder engagement. In workshop 5, we look at issues of moving to action and figuring out how to manage innovation, and today we're going to look at monitoring and reflection. And assuming that there is still a desire among the groups, we have a workshop 7 scheduled for presentation. And just a reminder that there's a lot of other things potentially going on to move the prospectus that you may be working on now to a full proposal, and the feasibility isn't part of what we've tried to address over this time period. Now, in the 4th workshop on managing multi-stakeholder engagement, we introduced another way of sort of cutting all of this, or cutting a perspective on the view of this work, and that was this idea of the 5 practices necessary to manage multi-stakeholder engagement. And focus on both system and process performance, managing initiating conditions, practice multi-stakeholder engagement, practice innovation management, practice monitoring and reflection. And again, the different workshops came together to pick up these various topics. So we've got 2 interconnected process frameworks here to help us manage the kinds of innovation projects that you're thinking about. Today we're going to pick up the last of our topics then, practice monitoring and reflection. And again, my insights into the practice of monitoring and reflection really come from the research work I did looking across the 30 Transforum projects to see what were the things that really contributed to differences of performance in those projects. And it became very clear that the more successful projects had created a key role of the process monitor. As a matter of fact, in the earlier Transforum projects, the monitor was something, or monitoring and reflecting was sort of diffusely the responsibility of team members. But as Transforum moved to the latter projects, they actually required that projects appoint someone to the role of monitor. And again, the monitor had this special responsibility to monitor the innovation trajectory, and most especially to observe how the process of the project team was actually promoting the innovation that was really desired in the project. And essentially, the process monitors performed two kinds of interventions. I've labeled them soft and hard here, and I'll say a little bit about the distinction. But soft interventions were things that monitors did every time the project team got together to work. There was this continual questioning of, where are we in the process? Are we comfortable with that? Do we see obstacles in how we're working together? And I view these as soft interventions because they were this continual questioning, and very often, as I talked with the monitors, these soft interventions could be to the group as a whole as they sat in the meeting, or very often they took the form of at breaks in the meeting or even off the site of the meeting, just talking one-on-one with individuals within the group to come to a sense of how things were going. So there was this continual questioning, and then the other part of the intervention was not allowing avoidance behavior, to use these softer interventions to get people to speak up in the meeting to certain issues that were there. On the other hand, there were hard interventions. There were times when the monitor stepped in and took a much more concerted strategy of bringing the group together to reflect. And one of the methods, and I'll talk about this a little later in my comments today, was from time to time the monitor would call a reflection workshop. And this was literally a timeout in the normal flow of project work to bring everybody together to focus on a critical process concern and to solve that concern together. And there was this sense that these kind of reflection workshops were critical to the actual learning and collaboration of the groups, that they were particularly effective at key points in keeping the process on a trajectory towards the innovation desired. And in talking to the monitors as well as to the project managers and others at Transforum, there was a strong sense across all of them that reflection and learning would not have happened without this strategy being in place. And so it is an absolutely critical thing. We adults don't tend to reflect and learn unless we're somewhat forced into doing it. And that was the sense here. Now, Catherine has said who typically filled the role as monitor, and I'm going to be covering that here in just the next couple of slides. So bear with us, and you will have the answer to that question, Catherine. Now, I want to talk a little bit then about what are the goals of monitoring and reflection. In a lot of grant situations, be it from government or from philanthropic organizations, there has been an increasing emphasis on monitoring and evaluation. And at some level, reflection is a kind of evaluation, but the spirit of the thing is really dramatically different, and that's what I'm trying to show in the table here. We can talk about results-oriented monitoring and evaluation, and of course that's about accountability. It's about objectively defining reality. It's about setting predetermined objectives and then being able to monitor the progress of the project. Well, this is a very task-oriented kind of monitoring and evaluation, and it's typically what we think of when we think of traditional projects that are very well defined, that have a very clear methodology to them, and in that sense it is about strictly speaking control to the objectives. Now there is, as my source material here, Reflexive Monitoring Action, suggests, a constructionist kind of monitoring and evaluation where there is learning and adjustment that's primarily arising out of interaction and negotiation. And again, I think of this as being related to our more traditional notion of multilateral kinds of projects, where you do in fact have a lot of different actors engaged, but the engagement is more of the participatory kind as opposed to the full engagement that we've been talking about with our methodology. So the kind of reflection and monitoring that we're advocating for our projects is this notion of learning how to contribute to system innovation. We're really not rehashing existing reality or even believing that reality is objectively knowable, but it's about developing a new reality for these systems and then putting the prevailing values and institutional settings up for discussion and ultimately for change. And so the ultimate goal of monitoring and reflection are the things that you see here in the third paragraph of our table, and it is quite a different approach for more traditional projects. There is a monitoring and reflection cycle, and that in some sense starts with observation, moves on to analysis, to reflection, and to adjusting project activities. And although I'm showing it here as sort of one cycle, the truth of the matter is, as soon as you adjust the project activities, then you go through a new cycle of observation, analysis, reflection, and further change, so that we're really talking about this cycle happening over and over and over again within the progress of the project. So you monitor the activities in the project process, and also you monitor what's happening in the system that you're trying to have impact on. You analyze and examine those observations, and you take account of what has actually occurred in regard to the outcomes you're pursuing, what you have observed in terms of cause and effect relationships, your progress in terms of what you wanted to do, and then you move into serious reflection on the assumptions, values, higher goals. You fundamentally pose the question, are we on the right trajectory here for where we want to go? What have we learned? And then based on the answers to those questions, you end up actually adjusting project activities so that you move back on track if you've gotten off, or you really apply some learning that you've picked up, and that helps you move in a somewhat different direction or helps you take the next step in the process. So again, this is the fundamental flow that needs to be thought of as occurring again and again and again across the life of the project. Now we'll come back to Catherine's question and more deliberately pick up the idea of the monitor's role here. Well, who can be a monitor? Well, the truth of the matter is everyone in the project team has to contribute to monitoring and reflection and holds some responsibility to view monitoring and reflection as an integral part of the project process. But at the end of the day, as Transforum discovered, you really have to ultimately limit the number of people who hold responsibility to act in the role of monitor. And that probably means one person. And as I said, towards the end of the Transforum project, they would actually bring a specialist in from outside of the project team to play this particularly critical role. Although there's no reason to believe that you couldn't take a team member within the project group and assign them the role of monitor, but then they really have to be given the opportunity to play that role because it is so unique and it is in its own way very time consuming that to expect that that person will do a lot of other things within the project is probably not very realistic. The task of the monitor is to do this intervening via the monitoring and reflection cycle. In other words, that cycle and keeping that cycle moving is really the responsibility of the monitor. So that progress and process with goals, aspirations, system change, they have to have these things in their minds as they observe. And then the monitor has to recognize when an intervention is needed and then carry out that intervention. And again, I will give you a list of innovations here shortly. The other interesting thing is the attitude that the monitor has to bring to this role. And there are two types of attitudes that the monitors need to be able to use effectively as part of the intervention process. Number one, they have to use what is termed appreciative inquiry. That is intervening through insightful questions. Rather than challenge directly what the group is doing, use the questioning of, are we headed in the right direction? Do you sense that this is the right approach? Are you feeling that there's some tension over this point? So this role of appreciative inquiry can be very, very important to the monitor. In fact, one of the most effective monitors for a couple of the Transforum projects was a relatively young PhD student. She had no particular status of any kind within the groups that she was working with, but she was very, very skilled at this art of appreciative inquiry. She used her status as a student to ask what others might have deemed maybe sometimes a pretty basic question, even sometimes what others might have viewed as somewhat simple or simplistic questions. But she used this ability to question in an incredibly powerful way within the group to continually bring them back to the heart of what they wanted to do. Now, at the same time appreciative inquiry can work, there are times when the monitor has to also be willing to show an attitude of critical analysis. And that is to have some kind of intervention that is based on a provocative challenge. If the group is continuing to ignore a particular process problem, then at some point the monitor has to stand up and say, we must stop the process and work on this. And so, whereas appreciative inquiry is a very soft approach, the critical analysis one takes more courage, and you really have to have a monitor who would be willing to provide the provocative challenge when it's needed. And the truth of the matter is, across projects, there are going to be times, or a lot of times, when appreciative inquiry may in fact work very effectively, but you almost always are going to run into situations where an attitude of critical analysis is also going to be essential to success. And then the final point that I want to make about the monitor's role is that there really has to be an appropriate division of labor within the group. The project manager or the lead project team or the lead of the project team really has to focus on moving the tasks of the team forward. Whereas the monitor needs to be this person who at some level stands to the side to observe all of the activity and again keep track of how it moves the whole process forward. But the project manager and the monitor need to work together. They need some time when they sit down together and talk about issues, because there may be process concerns that the project manager sees and doesn't know what to do with and needs to be able to turn to the monitor. And in that sense then, and I said it earlier and I'll say it again, the monitor must be free to monitor and to intervene. And that means you can't give them a lot of other project assignments, or they're not going to be able to carry out their job. And Renee says, how did the rules of engagement help facilitate the effectiveness of this role? Rules of engagement were absolutely critical, Renee. And again, a little later in my presentation today, I have some practical advice that came from a focus group I did with several very successful monitors and several very successful project managers. And so I want to come very explicitly back to your question a little later in the material. Now, let's give some very, I think, fairly practical examples of when and how monitors intervene. And it does, it is determined by the situation. Again, this notion of appreciative inquiry, raising questions or starting discussions, anytime something's unclear or elusive, if you're not making progress towards an ambition, that is a clear indication that the monitor needs to step in and create some kind of intervention. Again, from observing the group, the monitor can simply say, look, you know, we're coming up against this challenging point. We've come up against it in 3 meetings now. Don't you think we need to stop and actually settle this thing instead of allowing the challenge to keep gnawing away at the group process? And then finally, this notion of observing even the interpersonal reactions between team members and understanding that where there tends to be fundamental points of disagreement in these kind of projects, sort of working through that kind of disagreement is often critical to being sure that the stakeholders involved actually enable the project rather than ultimately exercising their veto against the project. Now, I want to come back to more of these, what I call hard interventions or strategies for really doing things that are more invasive to the process because they may be necessary. And again, our source material on reflective monitoring and action really explains many of these things that are on this list. In addition, for those of you who have access to the License to Grow book, which has Sander as one of the authors, there's a very extensive appendix in that book that also goes into a number of these harder interventions. For us today, I'm in essence going to do a quick overview of the first three of these, primarily because there were a number of the Transform projects that utilized these first three strategies, I think, rather successfully. Also in regard to the engagement in Detroit and even last February, the engagement of our global partners when we brought them to Detroit. The learning journey to me is perhaps one of the more effective kinds of very deliberate interventions that can be very helpful to monitoring and reflection. So first of all, let's pick up the idea of creating an action learning agenda for your group. And essentially the purpose of such an agenda is to formulate the challenges that arise or are going, or we might even say potentially arise within the project, record these challenges and keep track of them as they are resolved and as new challenges arise. And if you do that, you will in essence be defining the learning path that occurs during the whole project. And there are some fairly clean steps that you can engage to create the action agenda. First of all, at the very beginning of the project, you want to identify the initial tough questions. Now, these tough questions are really a process of very often converting the challenge you encounter into a question to be resolved. So that, for example, you may be frustrated at the very beginning because you can't get any business people engaged in your coalition. Well, you need to move beyond that as an observation to say, how will we or how can we get business people to the table? And that question, and it's a tough question, allows you to focus then on coming up with answers, interventions, strategies to have that happen. Or again, another classic example that a number of the Transform projects ran into was we can't get the local government authorities to allow some flexibility in their regulation. And again, rather than just simply get angry even at some level that this thing or these folks aren't doing what you want them to do, convert it into a tough question by saying, so how will we influence local government officials to give us the room we need to experiment? Because the question then gets you focused on overcoming the challenge instead of dwelling on what the challenge is. The second step then is to put the tough learning issues on the project meeting agenda. In other words, don't allow yourselves to create this set of tough questions and then put it to the side and say, well, now we've got to really work on the tasks of building the innovation we're talking about. No, you've got to integrate these tough questions into your project meeting agendas and actually make progress against that agenda. And Sander has added his, this is also about the challenges that were not anticipated. Yes, and that is part of the notion that this is a dynamic thing, because as you move through, you're going to discover that things that weren't challenges at the beginning become challenges, and then they have to be added to the learning agenda over time. Third step here, collectively plan and record interventions to deal with the tough issues, formulate lessons then that you've learned together and evaluate your interventions. And then this fifth point, which is the point Sander's dead on correct about, is you've got to continuously update the learning agenda. As things are resolved, they move to the resolved part of the agenda, and then as new things arise, the new tough questions get added to the top of the list, and as time goes on, this creates this learning pathway across the activities. So it can be a very effective approach to monitoring and reflection within the team. Documenting all of this becomes a great tool for creating a project memory. Absolutely, Renee. And that's, again, why I think the action learning agendas or agenda is a very useful intervention, and again, the monitor takes charge of this kind of agenda. And yes, Sanders says there's even a name for that. It's called a learning history. And again, that can be a very useful part of monitoring and reflection. Let me switch to a second intervention that seemed to be used quite effectively within the Transform projects, and that was the monitor from time to time deliberately calling a timeout, as it were, and create a reflection or reflective workshop to keep the process open and to solve process difficulties. And in this case, you know, we said you need to be sure that these problems get on the regular meeting agenda, and that's true, but from time to time you're going to discover that there are some things that if you merely take some regular meeting time to try and resolve, you don't really resolve it. And so the reflective workshop is deliberately setting a specific and separate time from the regular project meeting process to work on these critical concerns in a very concerted way. Again, the monitor holds the responsibility to call and to chair these workshops. It's always done in consultation with the project manager and, to the extent possible, the team members themselves. And the agenda can take many forms, and if you seem, for example, in your project group to just not be making progress on the task side of things, then take a time out and say, how do we need to change the process? What's missing that seems to be the obstacle? Issues of trust are critical. It's very interesting. A couple of the process monitors were very clear about this notion that very often their job was to identify the elephant in the room, some big issue that everybody knew was an issue, but nobody really wanted to take on. And very often these workshops got to be about those elephants in the room. Why aren't we dealing with it? And let's deal with it and move on. And again, there were also times when these reflective workshops were called very specifically to just lay out the list of what had been learned to date and how that learning should adjust what the project would do in the future. So again, this notion of calling very deliberately a timeout to take on these big issues, I think proved, or again in discussions with the Transform participants, this seemed to be viewed as a particularly successful kind of intervention that was regularly needed. Then the final one that I will pick up today is a learning journey. There's actually quite a bit of literature about this kind of approach. But a learning journey is really a physical trip around the system. And you want to be sure that the team travels together on the journey, because it's as important as what happens between the trip visits is as important as what happens when you actually visit key stops as you're making your trip around the system. Because there are all sorts of informal opportunities, if you set up the learning journey properly, for the participants to really be working on issues with each other as they're also getting out of their more traditional roles wherever they may be in the system. And again, Renee, Catherine, and others from Detroit helped put together an absolutely fantastic learning journey for our international partners February a year ago when we had our convening in Detroit. And this ability to move together, to experience together, is part of what makes a journey, a learning journey, really very effective. It gets everybody outside their normal environment. You bring diverse, ambitious, fascinating people together to be taking a simultaneous look at a problem, and then you begin to learn how different individuals and contexts come together, and very often you do tend to be surprised by what it is you learn. But another part of successful learning journeys is to emphasize self-reflection. The participants really have to be willing to look within, and as we say here in point number 3, to reconnect with the fire that drives you and the soul that is who you truly are, because in essence it's getting into self-reflection that opens you up for more experiences and more innovation. And again, we have comments here about traveling the system is a great way to open people, absolutely, and to generate new ideas. And at the key points years ago now, as I began to evolve the concept of the product center here at MSU, we took a bunch of key stakeholders from Michigan, and we took a bus trip together to Nebraska to look at the food technology center that they had in Nebraska, and it was a marvelous trip. And we saw a beautiful food technology center there in Nebraska. But what I'm here to tell you is the conversations and the interactions in the bus, in the motel, in the couple of evenings we traveled. It's worth its weight in gold in terms of getting diverse stakeholders to really begin to move from mere participation to true engagement in the process. Now, again, I've only highlighted three of these much more explicit strategies for promoting monitoring and reflection, but these three I think are particularly effective and particularly useful in a lot of innovation processes. Now, over these next several slides, and I'm not going to try and go into all of these, but as part of my research project, I brought together a focus group made up of roughly, I think it was roughly divided 4 and 4 process monitors and local project managers from the various Transform practice projects. And I said, you know, let's think about creating together a set of do's and don'ts about how you go about doing the process itself, but also thinking about this role of monitor. And so I'm simply going to share here this list of do's and don'ts that we developed. And the first thing that they talked about together, and this goes back, I forget if it was Renee and Catherine that brought this point up, but they said absolutely you must explicitly establish the rules of the game. And you need to be explicit about the fact that in this case, if you're using the Transform approach to working, then it is a new game. And you've got to be able to say, why can this work? How can it work? You've got to introduce people to an open attitude and maintain an open attitude throughout the process. And so we're really in a situation here where sitting down, being explicit about the need for openness, the need for learning, the need for true engagement, all of those things need to be established very early on in the process. And again, in workshop 4, I actually gave you a fairly explicit list of rules of the game that would be well worth going back to. Now, the other thing that our practitioners also said was that very early on you have to create a foundation for the process, so that you've got to focus on and create these shared or connected values that we've talked about quite a few times across the workshops. You've got to, as a group, articulate and align your expectations for each other's behavior and nature of engagement. Um, because if you cannot create a common domain, you're going to continue to potentially at least refight fights again and again and again throughout the process. So you really do have to start with this creation of a common domain. And finally, you really have to think about how do you translate these, what uh, all of the diverse ideas within the group to a set of shared objectives and a clear mission for the organization. Now, when we did the focus group, there was actually quite a bit of discussion among the participants about which of these things really came first. Did you first have to establish this foundation for the process, and with that in place, then move on to one of the first real work products as being the rules of the game? Or did you really have to lay down the rules of the game before you could even begin to create this shared sense of purpose to the organization? Well, I'm not sure in our focus group discussion we ever came to a clear conclusion about which of these things really came first, but everyone agreed that it is the combination of these things that has to be established very early on in the process if you're really going to effectively do monitoring and reflection to learn across the project. Now, another set of dues that were very important to the group was being able to use diversity constructively. I remember having a number of meetings within the planning group for Detroit where this really did take on the form of some very important discussions that I think were critical to effective process. Again, respect and use all the differences in needs, styles, perspectives, even languages. Listening is an essential skill in these kinds of processes. And again, this continual focus on trying to connect the different interests of the stakeholders. And again, it's not so much that you want everybody to come to have the same values, but you've got to see where the connections are among the values that will allow you to move ahead in the process. And then these practitioners said you really have to manage the team process. And there was a fair amount of discussion about being sure that all of the team members felt that that the team meetings were a safe environment for discussions. And so if there's, and again, sometimes you have to say some challenging things to each other in such a team, but it has to be done in a way in which these are not personal attacks, that these are things that everyone feels that they can respond to in constructive rather than destructive ways. Invest in team building, keep the team energy high, manage the quality of relationships. You've got to develop the communication tools that will allow the network to be continually together, and there has to be a sense of group responsibility. And again, I could dwell a lot on each of these, but I think it's useful to just highlight these critical things that the practitioners sensed were important. And then, of course, the special level of managing the innovation process. Sanders spoke a lot to this last week, and again, I'm not going to sort of read all the bullets here, but you've got to continually keep in mind the nature in which innovation is driven. Identifying the bumps, being adaptive in management, keeping the eye on the ball of the sustainability goal, connect processes with the project, celebrate the small wins, and again, just some critical practical advice about things to do as you're managing innovation. And what was also interesting that came out of this is, as important as it is to manage the internal network of your project team, you've got to understand that you've also, along the way, got to be communicating to the external world. People that may become critical later in the process for implementation issues or to help you overcome certain kind of obstacles. And again, the project managers and monitors both essentially said you've got to look to the outside world and build your networks there, as well as your need to build your networks within the project stakeholders themselves. Now, it was interesting. At the same time, these folks created this relatively long list of do's. They also had some very strong opinions about what you shouldn't do or allow to have happen within the process. And number one, and for those of us who are academics in the crowd, and I may be the only pure academic in the crowd, they all said, don't let the scientists dominate. Don't let scientists be the project leaders. Don't let researchers dominate, and don't be too explicitly theoretical. So although knowledge institution folks, university folks, are a critical part of any coalition, you've got to be very careful to not let them use their science to dominate the process. The second set of don'ts is, again, they expressed it as don't fall prey to innovation management missteps. Don't fix the project team and the planned approach. You have to have flexibility within your project management to allow it to evolve. Don't separate technical, market, and societal issues. And it was really interesting, the sense that came out of the focus group that don't let the university types go off and be alone. Don't let the business types go off and be alone, etc. You really have to keep a mix of people together if you're going to fundamentally maintain this desire to address all three Ps, to really engage rather than merely participate. And again, there are several more here, and I'm not going to go into each and every one of them, but I think a lot of these things ring true. I see Catherine also says, don't let lawyers lead. Well, that's true. So I think there are fascinating needs. So don't morph your yes. And the one about not morphing your project to fit the funding possibilities. This is so hard, and I have to profess to you, given our several-year struggle to try and develop significant funding for the Global University, this has really been a difficult one for us. We have tried to stay true to the fundamental principles of the Global University, and yet those principles don't exactly fit very well with most of the project money that's out there. And at least a couple of you in the group are aware that we're trying to put together behind the scenes a relatively large National Science Foundation grant to help continue the Global University. And we've now encountered a lot of difficulties with NSF regulations about how we can use funds. And in essence, we're trying to fit their requirements, but I'm very concerned that the very requirements of the NSF money are at some level driving us towards engaging in a bunch of these don'ts as opposed to what we think are legitimately the do's. And I agree with Renee that courage is essential in this whole approach. Here's another interesting set of don'ts, and they put these don'ts under the head of these are don't rules of the game. Don't think for others. Don't be laissez-faire. Don't prejudge. Don't just continue to diverge, but figure out a way to converge. You've got to use all sorts of ways to communicate, not just the written word. And again, you can't be entirely preoccupied with daily urgency. Don't push. Don't drown in emotions. Don't take away the credit. Don't forget the fun in it. And I like that last one, and it seemed to be very important. We tend to think that a lot of this is, and a lot of this is about very serious issues, but if we take all the fun out of it, it really can create an environment that you really don't want to have. Again, this focus group with these folks, I think just this is a lot of very practical advice about monitoring and reflection. Now, the other thing that we came up with was some very specific advice to people who play the role of monitor. And the one set of things they said was that you have to do your work with competence. You have to have permission from the broader group to be the monitor and to be clear about what that means. So part of the rules of the game really have to be we've designated this person as monitor, and so when they give us the big time out sign that we've got to go have a reflective workshop, then we have to take that advice and we have to take action on doing that. You do have to take, if you are the monitor, an appropriately neutral position, but at the same time, you can't just be 100% neutral, because at times you have got to take on these critical interventions in defense of the process. Know what the group is talking about, and if you really can't add value, then you need to withdraw from the role. And that can be a tough one, but particularly if you're going to ask someone in the group to take on this role, then they have to, if they're discovering that they're finding it uncomfortable to do the role, or they feel they don't have the skills to do the role, then you've got to make some type of other arrangement. And then the other bit of specific advice to the monitor is don't let role responsibilities get out of alignment. You can't do everything yourself. Everybody has to have some sense of responsibility for monitoring and reflection, and you need to reach out to people to help you carry out this role. And at the same time, if you try and do it all yourself, you may actually be taking away the ownership of monitoring and reflection from the team, and that isn't an outcome that's desirable in these instances. And then finally, don't take the role of the project director or manager. They have an important and distinct role, and your role is this intervention in terms of the project cycle. It's not about taking over the task responsibilities of the team. So again, I think some very practical advice about how to engage in these things. So if we summarize, the first thing is let's all remember that learning is not a natural act for adults, or for at least far too many of us. So we really have to make special arrangements to be sure that it happens. And therefore, monitoring and reflection are essential to the group's success. The role must be assigned to someone explicitly, even if everybody remains some level of responsibility. You've got to monitor system and process progress. You've got to intervene with both soft and hard strategies, and you have to deliberately alter the project's trajectory based on your reflections and your learning. And it is a cycle. Observation, analysis, reflection, adjustment, leading back to observation, analysis, reflection, and adjustment. Now, that takes us to the end of the new material in terms of the topic of section 6. Or workshop 6, but I do want to go back now and just sort of review everything that we have put on the table over the 6 sessions, since this will bring the content discussion to a close. If you recall 6 weeks ago, one of the goals of doing these workshops was to take an idea for creating innovation in your region's metropolitan agri-food system and convert it into a fundable, doable project. Now, given that we haven't gotten a lot of project ideas through the prospectus stage at this point, this was our goal, and we'll talk a little more about how we try and finish it off, so to speak. We did use the Global University Paradigm, specifically its operating principles, and I'll come back and talk about them again in a moment in the review. And again, lots of what we talked to you about was built on what we learned by doing this very extensive project in the Netherlands called Transform. We gave you this innovation creation process, and again, I've reviewed it every session since we began the process. I did it today, so I'm not going to do it again, but this is one way to cut the world of creating innovation, is understanding that there are these processes or these things as a checklist, but also recall that even though this looks like a linear process, in the real world, you're going to move forward, back, and all around till you actually make it through this process in real time. And the other thing, again, we tried to introduce yet this additional way of cutting the material to think about, since it surrounds in large measure, how do you help a multi-stakeholder coalition truly manage itself in such a way as to create real multi-stakeholder engagement. And we said there were 5 critical practices, and again, we've tried across the workshops to give some kind of both conceptual and practical advice about how you do these things. And now I want to go back to the original 5 operating principles that we argued were necessary to design and foster effective innovation. And hopefully, as you remember these 5 principles, you're going to go, my word, I know a whole lot more today than I did 6 weeks ago about what these principles mean. And these principles need to be practiced in every innovation project. You need to be able to create value across all elements of sustainability, people, planet, and profit. And again, we spent a whole workshop on that. You have to engage key stakeholders from these various dimensions of stakeholders, and then you got to truly get them to work together throughout the process. Again, a lot of time spent in workshop 3. You've got experiment with innovation as a means to move beyond conflict, compromise, to co-creation, learning, action. It's a lot of workshop 4, although we talked about it at many other times in the workshops. Monitor and reflect to create and share new knowledge. We talked about that today. And then finally, if you want to really optimize change, you got to talk about the technology or hardware, the human capabilities or software, and the organizational and network design or orgware in the innovation process. And again, workshop 2, we spent a lot of time talking about the nature of innovation. So we have tried to give you living examples of these principles, but also a conceptual framework for carrying them out in the real work of innovation. Now, these last 4 weeks I had positioned as the tests of potential. And so you ought to legitimately be thinking to yourself, did we pass or can we pass these tests of potential? And so here are a couple of questions, and only you can answer them at some level. Does your innovation concept, that is the idea that you started with, the set of champions, the problem or opportunity you had identified, does that innovation concept have the potential to create value across people, planet, and profit, meaningfully engage multiple stakeholders, be managed in such a way as to create innovation, that is, move beyond debate to action, and assure that there is monitoring and reflection to learn as the process advances. So if you could truthfully say, yes, I believe I have a project concept here, an innovation concept here that can meet those 4 tests, then you really have something that has true potential, and you need to move on to the next step of doing the much more detailed work of proving the feasibility that you can actually get it done, as it were. So the final assignments, how are you going to monitor and reflect to learn? and then a final prospectus paragraph, that essentially looks at that last slide I just gave you, and you need to be able in a single paragraph to say we have proven the potential of our idea. Now, we may not have proven its feasibility, but we've at least proven that it's a worthy idea with potential. And in the entrepreneurial world, we always talk about our clients having to put together their 30-second elevator speech. And the setting under which this is almost always described is that you are in some tall office building someplace, and you encounter a critical stakeholder, be it someone who could give you money, someone you want to convince to become part of the project team, and if you only had 30 seconds to convince them to be part of what you want to do, what would you say in that 30 seconds? Because in our very busy modern life, there often isn't much more than 30 seconds to convince that critical stakeholder, that critical funder, that you're a person that should be given a much longer period to truly pitch the idea. So if you begin to imagine that you're going to write a final paragraph to your prospectus that's your 30-second elevator speech, what are you going to put there to seal the deal, as it were? The final observation I will make today is about making a whole prospectus. We've given you 7 assignments. There's some level at which if you pasted them all together now, you have the pieces of the prospectus. And remember, the idea of the prospectus is that this is a brochure for recruiting resources to and selling your innovation project. But you're going to need to fashion what I call here a logical thread that makes the pieces a whole cloth. Can you show how the 7 assignment answers really are internally consistent and reinforcing, and would a new stakeholder find the innovation project sufficiently compelling to commit? Now that really brings us to the end of all of the content material. Presumably, we're going to go into a series of coaching sessions as requested by our project teams, and if in fact we have teams that want to present, we're reserving May 6th, the morning of May 6th at this point, to do those presentations. And again, I think we've covered a lot of material. Hopefully we've covered in a way that really makes sense to you, and that you can use the material to fashion and to move ahead with your projects. So let me stop there, and this has, questions, comments. Sander, we've seen him in the chat box, haven't heard him much today. Sander, while people are thinking of questions or comments, are there any sort of final words on the content side that you'd like to share with us?
Well, Chris, I think you've done an excellent job in sharing what was a large part of my work at Transform. So thank you for that. And looking at what people have put in the chat box, I think it has been very clear what you've been telling them. So I actually do not have anything to add right now, but maybe there are final questions.
Well, and again, I want to thank Sander. It's been great to work with him throughout the Transform experience and ever since, and he's been a great addition. I also want to thank John Stone for providing a lot of support to us in the background, and I also want to shout out a big thank you to the MSU Global team, both Mohammed and Gwen. They've been absolutely fantastic to work with as well. Okay, Renee let's discuss how to facilitate an extended coaching experience. And I agree that it may not be realistic to imagine that we will have a lot of groups present, and since and I see a couple of more things. Okay, there's a request to Gwen by Renee. And maybe I'm just going to go ahead and put up the next bullet on this chart. Do the projects really want to make presentations? Or as Renee has suggested, Sander and I have been very involved in just developing the materials over the last 6 weeks, and there haven't been a lot of requests to us for doing coaching. There haven't been very many assignment submissions, and I guess one of the questions is, can we figure out a way, for example, now that the pressure of getting the weekly seminars is out of the way, for example, Renee and Blair and some of the rest of you from Detroit, I would certainly be more than happy to come down to Detroit on several occasions over the next few weeks and work with you if that would be useful. I'm close at hand. I think there would be some time that we could also, depending upon some of the questions, we could bring Sander in on Skype to work on some issues with the local groups. I think that we can structure this, and okay, that maybe later in May is the time to go about doing this. Blair, since I know you have had a group meeting with you, it would be useful as well. Maybe I don't know if your audio is connected today, but if we could communicate separately about some way in which we might be helpful to your group, and for any of the others of you here in Detroit, I really would like to reach out and be helpful. The other thing I would ask all of you is to give us some constructive feedback about, where did you find the workshop material most especially helpful? And again, I don't see a lot of questions coming up. So we're going to try and make then some separate contacts with each of you regarding how you would like to do the follow-up at this point, and we will confirm at some point over the next week whether or not there really are groups that Blair has raised his hand. Terrific. Can we get Blair on audio here?
Okay, can you hear me now? Is my audio working?
Yeah, we can't hear you, Blair, at this point.
How about now?
Blair, we can hear you. You just sound a little bit quiet, so I would just try and speak up a little bit, but I think we can hear you, and Chris can probably, tell your question, repeat your question to everyone else too. So I would go ahead.
Okay, thanks. So I guess there are two phases of it. One is some of us are going out to the Eco District incubator in May, like the 7th through the 9th. So we're using the kind of prospectus process to just try to organize some of the thinking prior to that. So I think this Thursday and probably next Tuesday it would be useful to have coaching sessions, maybe at 9 o'clock, to just talk through those pieces. But
can you hold on one? Can you hold on 1 second? I'm going to help Chris to be able to hear you so just 1 moment. He's having a little bit of an audio issue.
Okay.
Okay, Blair, can you just say a little test, and we'll see if Chris can hear you.
Okay, testing 1 2 3, testing 1 2 3. How'd that come through?
Yes, he can hear you, so go ahead with your question.
Okay, so I was just saying, I think, Chris, we're doing two phases of things. One is we're participating in the Eco District Incubator out in Portland, the 7th through the 9th of May. And so that's another training program and another kind of global best practice model for district level implementation of things. And so the serious work for the team will happen when we come back from the training. But prior to the training, we're going to use the prospectus process to help organize our thoughts and to begin to get some feedback, hopefully from you and Sander, on a lot of the formative ideas that we have for this 300-acre eco district on the Near East Side of Detroit. So I think it would be useful to have a coaching session this Thursday and perhaps next Tuesday at maybe 9 to go over the formulation of these thoughts into an initial prospectus. And then it would be wonderful to have some follow-up after the team really gets to work after we come back from Portland to have a deeper version of a real prospectus to go forward from there.
Well, I think that's certainly very doable from my perspective. That I could pick it up on Thursday morning, and you say let's arrange for 9 o'clock on Thursday morning, and also 9 o'clock next Tuesday morning for your group.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And do you want to do it, say, through Skype then?
Skype would work fine. Yep.
Okay, well then we can do that, and we'll get Sander to be engaged with us as well. And so we'll put down those 2 times to work with your group. And again, we will offer other groups the same opportunity to have these individual discussions. And again, we would be more than happy to work with groups later on. It doesn't have to be immediately, but we will intend to probably all the way to the end of June be able to continue to do these kinds of advising or coaching sessions. So, all right, terrific. And again, if any of the rest of you want to set up a specific time for coaching, we will make ourselves available. We thank you much for all of your participation, and we will continue the process. And again, we'll touch base with the other groups about, do we really want to make any kind of formal presentations on May 6th? But we'll do that offline, and we'll be back to talk more with you individually. So take care, and we'll continue the conversation.